Hi, I'm Sarah Hiner, and welcome. And I'm sorry I'm a minute late. You've all been probably waiting online to get in like a Trader Joe's, socially distanced. Anyway, so welcome to our this is our third Facebook Live. I'm super excited about it. We've gotten some great response so far, and we've been talking about all sorts of challenges with regard to the coronavirus and the pandemic and the quarantine. And today, frankly, it's about emotional health. Besides the financial challenges, besides the health challenges that everybody's suffered, is this other enormous emotional pain and fear and what I'm calling, a PTSD of the quarantine and of this pandemic. So I've got Dr. Mark Goulston with me, and he's going to be answering the questions, and he's going to be giving his brilliant perspective. I'll tell you in a moment who he is and why he's so good to be talking to me about this. Don't forget that you can post comments in the comment box so that they'll be filtered to me if you've got questions at all. So please let me know what you're afraid of. And then let me also give you a couple other things. Next Tuesday, we're doing a Facebook Live, 2 o'clock from inside the ICU, actually, at Stanford Hospital, Dr. Joe Feuerstein, who has had COVID, and he's been treating the patients and dealing with it from the inside. So we're going to hear from him and find out what's going on from the inside of an emergency room in ICU. And then next Thursday, Dr. Jake Teitelbaum will be back with me. We're going to talk about sleep. Getting enough sleep is critical to your immune system, but with all this stress, sleep is not really something we're doing such a good job at. So that is coming up. That'll be next Thursday at 2 o'clock. So lots coming up. If you can't make it at that moment in time, we will always restream it and make the video available. All right. Mark Goulston, hi. Let me tell everybody who you are. Dr. Mark Goulston, brilliant psychiatrist. He is an FBI and police hostage negotiation trainer, so he can talk to anybody and get through to anybody. He's the author of numerous books, including Get Out of Your Own Way, Overcoming Self-Defeating Behavior, and these emotional pains and our PTSD and our holdbacks and fears play right into that. And he is a regular longtime contributor to Bottom Line, a very dear friend, very prolific, has his own blog, has his own podcast. You can learn all about all that he does at markgoulston.com. So thank you for being with me, my friend.
Well, it's always good to see you. I wish it was under better circumstances, but let's see who we can help, and because we're all in this together and we're all going to get through it.
We definitely are. So I characterize this as PTSD. How do you characterize, what are you seeing in your world and what you're seeing in terms of depression, anxiety, trauma, what people are experiencing?
Well, one of my books was PTSD for Dummies in the Dummies series. And even though it was the Dummies series, people see it as a pretty good resource. I see we're going to be developing PTSD. I think we're laying the seeds for it. The key is how to prevent it. And here's something that I hope I'm wrong about. Something else. I was a suicide specialist for 35 years, and I was a boots on the ground kind of interventionist, and I had a pretty good track record. And I hope I'm wrong. But I think there's going to be a surge. I mean, there's already some increase in suicides, but I think there's going to be a surge. And I wanted to share it with you because if we get it out, then maybe we can counter it. I think there's going to be a surge in first responders, people who didn't get to see their parents die on the ventilator, all kinds of awful things. Because what happens is when you're going through a trauma, so we don't have the PTSD yet, when you're going through a trauma, you suppress your feelings because you got to survive. You got to focus. You got to do whatever you can do for the day. But what's happening is you're seeing or in the middle of something horrific, but you can't allow yourself to feel the natural feeling, which is horror. And what happens is when you see something horrific, you start to feel terrified, which means you start to feel fragile. And so you say to yourself, if you're a healthcare worker, first responders, seeing all these awful things, don't panic, push it down, stay focused. And what happens, and so I'm giving you an idea of what PTSD from the inside out of someone who developed it goes through. So there you are, you're pushing it down and you're suppressing it, and it is exhausting. That's why you hear these stories of people barely making it through the day, nurses and doctors, and they go home and they just go into a closet and they just start to cry. And then what happens is it's so exhausting to keep pushing it down, that we then repress it. And I'm sorry for that kind of gobbledygook term, but repress means we put it into our unconscious. So if you think of computers, your working memory, your RAM is your short-term memory. That's what makes the computer work. But you have this big hard disk that you throw everything into it. And our mind is very much like that. So we try and push down our feelings, and it's so exhausting that our mind then allows it to go into our unconscious. But our feelings, when they're repressed, don't just stay there. It's those repressed feelings that trigger symptoms like overeating, drinking too much, shutting down, withdrawing. And a lot of times people don't make the connection between that repressed feelings that wants to bubble out and those symptoms. And you're just doing it to sort of make it through. And this is going to go on for a time now. And then what happens, there will be a point in which it seems like we're turning a corner, and then we feel safe. And initially, there'll be some relief. But if you're one of these people that has seen horror, felt terror, pushed it down, focused, it's going to bubble out because you got past it, but you never got over it. This is what happens to veterans. Veterans see the horrors of war, and they squish it down. And then when they get home, it wants to come out. But what you feel is, if I let it out, it's going to eviscerate me from the inside out.
Right. So I got that. And the intensity and the war zone that these people have been through.
That's right.
And I don't want to focus, though. That's as terrible as that is. I don't want to focus there, because what I'm seeing, and because they are definitely going to deal with it, they're going to need support. But I'm a little worried also about the 349 million other people, or however many people are.
I want to talk a little bit about fear.
Fear. Because let me just say, like, what I'm seeing in people, it's like zombie land. You go to the grocery, everybody's in their masks, they're not looking at each other, they're not talking to each other, they're afraid to go out. I have conversations with people, and they're panicked to go to the grocery store. I was surprised, actually. I made some plane reservations last night. I'm thinking about going on a trip. And then I went, wow, I really am nervous about it. And yet I'm very strong with regard to, my immune system. I generally don't get respiratory infections. Like, I'm not afraid of it. And yet suddenly there's this, like, the panic, the pressure, the headlines, the social ostracizing if you go out without a mask on and you don't have there's all these other things that all of us, and even kids who are, being told, like, they're living in this world of masks and you can't go to the store, like all that lower level. This is not horrors of death, and I'm not diminishing that, but there's all of us the rest of the world. One day we're going to have to go to the office and everyone's going to be afraid to have a meeting. And how do we get, that's what I'm trying to address here, the normal, like, again, I called it PTSD because I like to bastardize, I like to steal words. But I think there's this element of this, like, lagging pain that we're going to deal with.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this dread, this fearfulness that people are feeling. As bad as fear feels, it's nothing compared to panic. Panic makes you really, it just whacks you out. Right. And there's a term called free-floating anxiety. And free-floating anxiety means you're anxious and you can't attach it to anything. And it's such an awful feeling to have free-floating anxiety that you don't know what to be anxious about. You will attach it to things to explain to yourself, I don't have this free-floating anxiety, which I'm afraid could turn into panic. I'm going to attach it to something. And then what happens is we start to believe what we're attaching it to. And as bad as fear is, free-floating anxiety that flirts with panic is far worse. So that's what's happening, is that we have this massive free-floating anxiety, and we're attaching it to, that's what I'm afraid of. And then our mind wants to convince us that it's real when it's not real.
But there are real things. They're telling us, be very afraid. Everyone that coughs, people are afraid that they suddenly have COVID, and then they're suddenly going to die. I have somebody who's got young kids who are saying to her, Mom, are you going to die? Because it's so much floating around there. You go to the grocery store and they give you the hairy eyeball if you walk past someone or walk the wrong way. I mean, it's just, and it's so destructive to that constant intensity and I'm assuming that there's a lot of cortisol going on in our bodies, which is inflammatory and actually lowers our own immune sensitivities, right? So that how should people give that credit? I mean, again, how do they shut off the TV? How do they shut off their mother-in-laws? How do they shut off the array of opinions that are out there on you should go, because everyone's got an opinion. And again, anybody watching this, let me know what you're afraid of. Like what's bugging you, and what are the fears that you have with regard to this? So like, how do they not give that credibility and not, how do I walk into the airport and not be afraid?
Well, I think you made a good point, and all the recommendations are to try to shut down on the stimulus that's just overstimulating you. So if you're already overwhelmed and you're watching more, you're going to get more overwhelmed. But that said, I'm kind of like you. I mean, I feel like I'm rubbernecking it. I mean, I'll share something, personal. I can't even watch escapist stuff, because when I used to watch escapist movies and you get out of the theater, you come back and you relax from that, that horror movie or whatever. But now it's almost like I can't do that, because when I come back to the coronavirus. So there's almost like no escape for this kind of thing. So, I think, someone, I was on a interview and someone said, we always guard our calendars. We had an appointment to do this, Sarah. So if you can start calendaring in things that give you more control, that are healthy routines. Also think of routines that you can still do, that even if you're not in the mood to do it, that once you get started, you tend to feel better. And start to schedule them, start to put them on a calendar, because what happens is a lot of the routines we have, a lot of the escapes, a lot of the things we do that we can't do now that we're hunkered down, were ways that we would manage our anxiety in day-to-day life. So the more that you can have routines that even if you don't want to get started in them, they tend to make you feel better, and start to schedule them, and then keep to your schedule, and just kind of try that. Something else you brought up about cortisol, and I think I sent you some information. There's something that I've been sending out to organizations, but also to families. There's something that I call the 10-word check-in.
I love this. Yeah, I was just going to bring that up to you.
Okay, and if you go to markgoulston.com or you look up 10-word remote check-in, what's happened is a number of people who run companies or small businesses and they're doing things remotely, they say, we do this check-in because everybody's in the state of upset and upheaval, but we got to get business done. And I don't want to shortchange someone. If someone on the check-in says, I'm really worried because, my mom or dad's on a ventilator, you don't want to cut them off. And yet you don't want to give them this empty offering. Let's have a check-in and then change the subject. So something that I've developed with some of the organizations that I consult to, but you can use this in families, it's called the 10-word check. And you can do this with your family. And what you can do once a day is you say to the people in your family or people you're dealing with remotely, say, here are 10 words, and I want you to think of the worst time you had since we last checked in, and attach the word to what you felt. So don't get into a sentence, just attach the word, and I'll list the words for you. Anxious, depressed, frustrated, afraid, angry, ashamed, alone, lonely, exhausted, numb. Now there are other ones, overwhelmed, whatever, but those 10 are good to go. And what people are doing on these Zoom calls, if any of you do Zoom calls, people are just exhausted from Zoom calls, partially because you got to look at the other person. You can't multitask or pick your teeth or do something like you could do on the phone. You got to look at them and they see, and then when you put in your name instead of the picture, they figure, oh, they're doing 5 other things. And so you get exhausted from that. And when you look at these Zoom calls in the chat, people are listing, oh, here's a good link, here's something, people are giving messages, and that's exhausting. But when people start to think of what the word is that matches when they felt at their worst. And why would you do this? Because what you're saying, and you say this in your family, I don't want anyone in our family or our company to feel alone in how awful they can feel. And I can tell you, Sarah, you can see it in your mind's eye that when people start listing their name, people that you didn't know as people that you knew as someone in accounting or sales or whatever, and they have their name and they put in something like alone, angry, numb. And again, what happens is it is a collective catharsis. And what a catharsis is being able to safely express what you feel. And what's happening, and some organizations have told me, they said, this is the best culture builder we've ever done, because if you can picture it and you see all the names and there's not all this links and people sending messages, you begin to feel we're all in this together.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. And then what happens is it crosses over into this amazing feeling of admiration. You say, boy, we're all soldiering through this. And the combination of that shared vulnerability plus admiration, what happens is there's a huge surge of something called oxytocin. You bond to everyone, they bond to you. And oxytocin starts to ratchet down cortisol.
And calm. Now, let me ask you
ratchets
this.
Yeah.
When I read that list just alone, I found it a helpful just solo exercise, because I went down that list. I went anxious, no; depressed, no; afraid, no; frustrated, yes. Like that, because and just putting the word on it helped me release it. You know, like when you identify the problem, and then
Yeah.
you know, if you journal about it, write about it, reflect on it, like it took it out of me and kind of gave me permission. Like it was its own silent hug of
Totally.
acknowledgement. Okay,
Well,
I can see what that is, and then it helped release some of that.
there's a term called affect labeling. And there's a wonderful researcher at UCLA, Matthew Lieberman, and he wrote a book called The Social Brain. And he's done a lot of work, and he said that when we accurately label what we're feeling, it lessens the activation in our brain or your agitation by a third. And so that's not venting. It's underneath it all. What I'm really feeling is I'm afraid. What I'm really feeling is I'm frustrated. And there's something about attaching the accurate word to the feeling you're having, and it calms you down. So, because a lot of people will say, well, let's do positive things. Let's be grateful. And I'm all in favor of that. But what happens is when you do those exercise, it's a little bit like some motivational speakers who pump you up. And then when they leave, you deflate.
Well, you're also still stuffing those emotions, and those fears are still in there. Now, you had something, because you'd sent me your blog about it, that you say it aloud, confirm it in your mind, and then say, yes, that's it. And then you take a deep breath and exhale, imagining it, so that you kind of bathe yourself in it almost and let yourself be it, feel it, and then release it.
Yeah. In fact, you just shared that that's exactly what you did, is that when you went through the list and you saw frustrated, you said, yeah, that's it. And just saying, yes, that's what I feel. You know, what people don't know is that when you can feel something and express it like that, it does release it, and you don't have to really do anything about it. You know, there's an interesting irony. When people become emotional, it's really not expressing feelings. They're trying to stay away from feelings. You know, when people get emotional, they're trying to stay away from feelings. And what are the feelings? It's, you know, one of those 10 things where you just feel vulnerable and exposed. But when you just can say it and feel it, it works. And something else, you know, that we talked about in the article, because people say, well, what do we do next? And something that some organizations are doing, which I think is a brilliant idea on their part, is, you know, how you can send people a chat file on Zoom, or even if you're on a Zoom call with, you know, relatives. And what happens is if you have a large number of people, you suggest people check in with each other when you have the same word. So if your word when you're feeling worse is frustrated or your word is numb, check in with each other each week and you just share what frustrated you most, what made you numb, what are you going to do about it? And so you form these subgroups of even more intense bonding. And what's going to happen is you're going to actually, through some of those groups or even family members who never express themselves, you're going to connect in ways that you never did because we're so busy in our lives, we often don't take the time to stop, pause, know what we're feeling and feel it and express it.
Awesome. Now, I'm going to play my own devil's advocate, right? So this is great in terms of helping people feel better about these feelings. I always have a thing about, I'll call it wallowing in the misery. I'm somebody who likes to get past things and free us, right? So so fast forward a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever. Will these feelings, they're not going to magically go away. So somebody asked about being afraid to get on mass transit, right? And I said before, I have mixed feelings about going to an airport. So we're going to walk out of here, but those feelings and those fears are going to linger. So how do we is it just facing them, acknowledging them, and then braving it through and then realizing it's okay? Like, how do we get on with life, frankly, when all this is done?
Well, see, I think the little tidbits, and there's going to be people who are listening to this say, no, I want to accentuate the positive. Well, what happens is it will feel like other people, you're not accentuating the positive, you're running away from, feeling vulnerable. And what's happening is there's going to be a number of people that say, well, that works for you because Sarah, you're a doer. You're always in action. That'll work for you because you can do that. And what's going to happen is they're going to feel a disconnect from them and they'll nod. They'll say, well, I'm glad it's working. Yes, Sarah, I'll try that. Yeah. Maybe I'll do something. I'll be in action. So this is an opportunity. And I think this is also an opportunity for us as people to connect with each other. In our vulnerability is not the same thing as helplessness. It's just vulnerability. And
so go ahead.
We don't connect in vulnerability. I've done a lot of talks to high schools and teenagers about dealing with stress and anxiety. And there's an exercise, and actually those 10 words came from an exercise that I did with Hollywood High School. And I said to them, and this is normal pre-corona, I said, if you're a teenager, 4 emotions: excitement, boredom, fear, anger. That's what you know. Mm-hmm. Excitement, boredom, fear, and anger. And what happened is I said, here's a different way to deal with your stress. And when I did the exercise, there's about 50 high school students. And I said, think of the worst time you felt in the last week and say the word. So if you can picture this in your mind's eye, each of them said the word. And afterwards I said, how did that feel? And they said, oh, that felt better. And I said, why? Those are negative words. They said, I didn't feel so alone. I felt like I belonged. Some people said, I felt like I belonged for the first time since I've been in this high school. And I said, well, that's because you just got a surge of this chemical, the belonging chemical. It's called oxytocin. Right. And what happened is that's not something you do in your life because the 4 main emotions you run by are excitement, boredom, fear, and anger. And that felt better. So write down the list. And when you're trying to reach people, do that. And again, it's not dwelling in it. It's checking in at the vulnerability. And then then you can say, what can we do? But if you try to bypass it, the way I look at it, Sarah, is when I dealt with people who are traumatized and it's really pushed on, I look at it as an abscess. And if you suture an abscess too soon, the person's going to get septic.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be one of those cold, don't acknowledge your feelings. I just I was looking for the acknowledge it and then not become a prisoner of it.
Well,
right?
that's
why. It sounds like what you're saying, that just this process of connecting and that raising the oxytocin level takes down a lot of that anxiety so that you can actually deal with it in a more rational way. And again, you don't feel as alone, you feel safer in the world.
Yeah, because what happens is when cortisol goes up, that stress hormone, it triggers this part of our brain called an amygdala. We got to survive. And the amygdala uh, causes our blood to go to our lower brain to survive in a way. And so we can't think. We are deer in the headlights and we can't think. And so when you have the bonding or that oxytocin surge, it calms everything down. So the blood flow goes up to our upper brain and then we can think. So if you have those groups, and I really love the idea that these organizations are doing, pair people with, because if you wouldn't pair well if what you feel is frustrated, it wouldn't be, you wouldn't be in sync with someone who feels lonely.
No.
Or feels whatever.
No.
But the point is, if you're with a bunch of other people who are frustrated, you can say, good. Boy, do I feel like I'm with my my kindred spirits. So who has some ideas or best practices for getting through this? And then you accentuate always about, who's moved past this and how did you do it? Whereas if you gave advice to someone who at their worst felt either lonely, or numb, and you felt frustrated, it wouldn't go in. You tell them what worked for you, it just wouldn't go in.
So it's important for people to understand how they operate. Is there a way or a place for people to identify who they are and then what those tactics might be for them? So that for me, it's feel it and then be in action, not in denial, but just I need to feel like, but other people need to feel safer. Other people need to feel connection. Like how does somebody find their mode of healing?
Well, this, as I said, I work with teenage groups, and high school is about dealing mental resilience. And one of the things that we came up with, and you can actually create this, maybe bottom line will create the digital thing, that's above my pay grade, but we created something called the stress relief tool. And what it is if you can imagine a little journal. I mean, I keep journals where, just expressing myself, just the journal helps. And what happens is when you're feeling upset, in the journal, you write down the day and the date. And then you imagine someone, a mother, a father, a mentor, a coach, someone who cared about you or cares about you. And I have 7 mentors and they've all passed away. And someone who I didn't really get to know, but I consider him a mentor just because of who he was your dad. Without knowing him that closely, he occupies that place in my head.
Right.
And so you imagine that person says, and what they say is, you can do this, write down the day and the time, and then here are the steps. What just happened? And you write it down. What did you think or feel? What did you think and feel when it happened? And you write it down. You don't have to do big paragraphs. And then, because some people think, some people feel. So what did you think and feel when that happened? That's the second step. The third step is, what does it make you want to do? What's the impulse? So this is what we tried to teach our kids in preschool. Use your words. Use your words. Express yourself so you don't act on the impulse.
Right.
I think I need some, remedial training on that. But the thing is, what does it make you want to do? I want to do such and such. And then the next step is, what'll happen if you do that? Well, I'll feel better, but if I scream, it's not going to make my mother or father happy.
Right.
When we're in close quarters. And then the next step is take a deep breath. And again, I'm imagining someone like your dad or my mentor is saying, take a deep breath, Mark. Mm-hmm. And then the final thing is, what would be a better thing to do?
Yes.
And actually, the tool is the better thing. The better thing is, I think just remembering you, thinking of you, remembering how you cared about me, when you were alive and walking me through it, I'm just feeling better. I'm getting it out. I'm being grateful. I'm feeling grateful to you. I'm missing you. And all those things just help settle you down. And you could make this like a little journal, especially for that. And just imagine these people walking you through it. Now, I do that because at my core, it works better when I imagine a conversation with someone walking me through it. Now, if you're the kind of person who can say these positive statements, these assertive things, then you don't need to conjure up someone like that. But for me, I like conjuring someone up because it helps the oxytocin.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think also just the steps as you went through it, it was very, I hate the word empowering, but it was very empowering because when you were coming to a solution, what can I do about it? Which gives you the power, and you realize that you're not stuck in a corner, that there are options to it. Now, somebody's asking me about, do you have any advice for kids? Again, the kids are anxious. Is this an exercise you can do with kids, or is there something else?
Yeah, you can do that with kids. Here's a couple other exercises. A good friend of mine and we worked on a transition program for returning Marines. And one of the things he would do to help to get at what was really bothering them, he would say, Marine, that's how they call each other, Marine, how are things going? And they would say something. And then he would use the 5 reallys. Well, I understand that, but what's really going on? And they'd go deeper. No, I understand that too, but what's really going on? And when you get to about the 5th, what's really going on, people will often share what's underneath it all. For Marines, what they shared with him, they'd stare at him like a deer in the headlights, and they'd say, sir, I saw and did awful things. And when I close my eyes, I see them more clearly, so I don't close my eyes much, sir. Mm-hmm. But what happened is, and then he said, all of us Marines have seen and done awful things. And here's an order, put it aside. So you can go through the 5 reallys, what's really going on, and see what comes up.
Right.
And then something that's also similar to that, there's something, it's something I call reverse psychology. And here's the fancy term, and I'll just use it once. It's called mediated catharsis. And what that means is when you give your kid words to express themselves that they don't have, they feel relief. And this is what it may look like. So you're with your kid and they're ornery and they're acting up, and you might say to your kid, I'm going to try something and maybe it'll make you feel better. And they'll go, what? You know, because they're sullen. You can say, look me in the eye and say, Mom, I really hate this. I mean, I hate it. I hate it. And I hate my life right now. I hate it. And I don't think it's ever going to get better. And see, why does that work? Because see, if they say that on their own, you're going to try and damper them down. Now, I understand that, and they're going to feel squelched instead of you're draining it, the abscess. Right. But when you give them permission, you're mediating, they're getting it off their chest. And when you do that, instead of you getting defensive, it changes everything. And then when they get it off, you can look at them with more compassion than you would before. And you could say, you know, honey, I understand. We all feel something like that. I think we're going to make it through. But do you see it? It's subtle, but it's very different than they're coming up with it and then you shutting them down. Because what you're doing is you're inviting them to get it off their chest.
Right. And again, back to your original point of this kind of frenetic frustration and angst running around that's just flying. And it helps direct them for it and give them a channel and put words to it, because they're too young. They don't necessarily even know how to express it.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you can do this with your spouses. I mean, if you have a spouse who's lost their job because of this, doesn't know if they're going to get it back, they're really worried. And a lot of men, what they do is they don't use their words, they withdraw, they get sullen. Mm-hmm. I heard an interesting quote from a friend of mine that I'm doing some suicide prevention work with. He said, you know, when you ask people, especially teenagers, how you're doing, and they say great, they're usually good. But when they say I'm fine, they're not.
Yep. There was a poem about I'm fine and all the things that what saying I'm fine really means.
Yeah. And so something you can do, let's say you have a spouse who's laid off and doesn't think they're ever going to work again. You can even try that with them. Now, again, you got to get comfortable with it, but you have to see that you're not provoking them. What you're doing is you're helping them get it off their chest because they're just keeping it in. And what you can say to a spouse is, you know, can I try something? You know, honey, I think you might feel better. What? I'm fine.
Or as my husband would say, don't tell me how I feel.
Don't tell me how I feel. Oh, so here's what you'd say to your husband. Okay, here's some instruction to Sarah. So can you say this to me, hon? What? Say, I think you'll feel better. What? Say, just say this to me. Sarah, get off my back already. Get off my back
already. He has
already.
no problem saying that.
You're trying to help me and you're making it worse already. You know, this controlling part of yourself, give it a rest, Sarah. Put a sock in it. You know, I'm going through enough already. What would happen is if you said that and he said it, he would start to laugh.
Yes. Just like I did. And I'm sure there are many, everybody out there who's got their moments of trying to, you know, fix those who don't necessarily want to be fixed or don't know, like, you know, they don't want, they feel invaded. All right, so let's get super specific in the last few minutes that we've got.
I'm using
so, huh?
I'm using that.
My husband's just jumping in.
using that.
My husband's jumped into our podcast right now. Go away.
I'm going to give you the Fudd response. The Fudd. Did you read the Fudd?
Huh?
Oh, here's the killer thing. If you're listening, you can use this anywhere. So you got a relationship like Sarah has with a husband, or yada, yada, yada. So this is what you do. If you're with someone and they're sullen or they're venting or they're complaining, the Fudd technique, and this is I have a book called Talking to Crazy, which is how to calm people down who drive you crazy. And I don't know what's going on my screen here. This is.
Being crazy. I think that's my father saying hi.
That's weird. Well, there you go. Well, hi. Nice to see you. Sarah and I miss you. She just does it in a different way. But
I like candles.
So the Fudd reaction is you say to someone, you let them vent or they get sullen and you say, I think you're feeling frustrated and I think you're holding back. They're going to go, what? You know, I think because people will talk about being frustrated.
Right.
They won't talk about if you say you sound angry, they won't. Say, I think you're frustrated and I think you're holding back. And they're going to go, what? You can say, yeah, I think you're frustrated and I think you're upset and I think you're disappointed. So can you fill me in on all of those? And what happens is, as the person talks about what they're frustrated about, you then say, and you feel it getting that off their chest, you can say, so, and what are you upset about? And that's what you really want to get out, because the upset is sort of a euphemism for what are you angry about? They get that out. And then after that, you can, as you practice this, they calm down. You could say, and I think you're disappointed in yourself, disappointed in me, disappointed in your job. What's that about? And what happens is when you're talking with them about their disappointment, it really is an oxytocin thing, because you've bonded to them, they calm down, and when they might say something, I'm disappointed in myself. I'm not handling this well. I'm trying to be patient with the kids and I'm snapping at them.
Or even again, in this whole pandemic of I'm disappointed in, I'm scared. I'm supposed to be the strong person. I'm scared. I'm disappointed that I've lost my job. We don't have money, like whatever, like all these other things that are going on.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I think if you manage this, what'll happen is you can see in your mind's eye that when they do that, that's when you can say, look, I understand, because we're all frustrated, upset, and disappointed. And I think we'll make it through it, even if we don't know exactly how, because we've been through things like this before and we always made it through.
Mm-hmm. Although no one's been through anything like this, but there have been everyone thought, 9/11 was the world coming to an end. There have been other tragedies.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most eloquent, I collect eloquent quotes. And one of my patients years ago was really close to her larger than life dad. I mean, really close. And this guy was beloved by the world. And she saw me for that. And she didn't know how she was going to deal with it. And then one day she came and she said, I think I'm better. And I said, what happened? And she looked at me, and you need to unpack this, Sarah, because it's so eloquent. She said, you know what it comes down to is living with life never being the same again.
Mm-hmm.
Living with life never being the same again.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's over. Doesn't mean I can't laugh. It'll just never be the same again. But people have had cancer. People have had bankruptcies. We've all gone through things where life was never the same again, but it wasn't necessarily worse.
Right, it's just different. So someone's just asking me, like, this almost feels like a mourning. Like, is it a processing of a grief, and then or is this beyond because it's more constructive, like it just changed?
Okay, so here the morning is letting go of life being the same again. Why we won't do it is because we're not letting go of it if it's being ripped away from us. But the point is, if you let it go, it can't be ripped away from you because you've let it go.
Yes.
It's like a mind switch.
Right. And there will be a lot of good to come from this. So let me, in the few minutes that we have left, let me get very specific again, because people are going to have to get out of their house. And I have this feeling like we're all going to be germaphobes. We're going to be afraid to touch anyone. You know, I always said, I actually did a video on this, like wash your hands and give someone a hug. I mean, just because that oxytocin and the touch is so important. But, you know, if somebody, they're honestly going to be afraid to go into that grocery store. They're honestly going to be afraid to get on the subway again, or to get on the commuter train, or to, whatever thing that they're going to now have to deal with, that life has changed. And is it simply this process of acknowledging the fear and then
Well, you can use
past it? Or is there other self-talk or something that they're going to have to work through?
Well, we just did it. So you can use that stress response tool. So there I am. Let's say I have to take a flight, and I'm going to give something, and I'm afraid I'm going to be in this confined space. So I can call up one of my, as I said, I call up one of my deceased mentors, and they say, what, Mark, you woke me. What's happening? I said, it's happening. I got to get on a flight. I got to get on a flight to go on something. I can't get out of it. So what do you think and feel? Well, what I thought and feel is that, I'm scared. I'm afraid if I'm in there and, and someone's mask, falls or something, I'm going to get infected. And so what does it make you want to do? What makes me want to cancel everything and just go hide? Yeah. And what would happen if you did that? Well, I can't do that. We'll take a deep breath, Mark. What would be a better thing to do? Just do it, do what's under my control, wash hands, the distancing. One of the things I do, I don't hear it talked about much. When I pass people, I just hold my breath. I hold my breath when I'm walking. They're not 6
feet. At the grocery store.
Yeah. They're not 6 feet, they're 4 feet. So I just hold my breath. That's good for your lungs too. As Chris Cuomo, you inhale. It's like breathing one of those rubber gloves.
Breathing exercises with Dr. Mark Goulston.
There you go.
Right. All right. I love that. Thank you. Any final words before I let you go?
You're unrelenting, Sarah.
It's true.
I
always got more.
And
that's okay. You can pass. Tell me how you feel. Do you feel done? Do you feel well communicated?
Oh, I'll tell you. Can I give another tip? This is a crazy tip, but as long as you're stuck at home,
you may.
This is going to be great with you and your husband,
and everyone else,
and everybody else. What you say, and I have a blog. You can find this all at markgoulston.com. And I think this is called the bare your neck, stuck at home, bare your neck strategy. And so what you say to someone in your family, say, you got a moment, I want to ask you something. It's actually an apology. Everybody's open to an apology, especially an unsolicited one. They never happen. And they say, what? At my absolute worst, how frustrated or awful can I make you feel about yourself and us? I'm going to say, what? No, at my absolute distracted worst, OCD worst, how frustrated and awful can I make you feel about yourself, that you're not doing the right things,
right,
or about us? And what happens is, if you do this sincerely and they look at you like, is it safe to tell you? And you say, yeah, now tell me. And then they say, when you're at your worst, it can be pretty awful. And at that point, what you say is, I'm going to fix that. You deserve better than that. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to fix that, and I'm sorry. It's amazing what that can do to a relationship. I did that with a few executives I'm coaching, and they said, I just had the best conversation in 10 years with my spouse.
All right. marriage counseling now with Dr. Mark Goulston.
There you go.
We started on PTSD, fear, and anxiety, and we're ending on marriage counseling.
Well, there
But
you go.
it's all about connection. All right, thank you so much. Mark Goulston, his website, Mark, where I lost it. Doctor, say it for me because I've lost it.
MarkGoulston.com.
Okay, perfect.
Goulston, MarkGoulston.com. And I'm just, see, I express myself. I have a case of bloggeria.
You always have words and words and words. It's very true. And let me just again remind everybody, next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we're in the ICU with Dr. Joe Feuerstein. Next Thursday, Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum will be back with me. We're going to be talking about sleep, which is so important for immune systems. And then let me also remind people, Bottom Line put together a free book about immune boosters to help you beyond the wash hands, beyond sleep, beyond some vitamin C, what other things that are our whole panel of experts. And we've got thousands of them. The book isn't thousands of pages long, but we took some of the best ones to give so that everybody can strengthen themselves. This is an excessive immune boosting, but we're all running depleted. The stress, the fear, the anxiety, it depletes us. So what else could you do to build yourself up, to build your defenses? So come back, put your comments in there. Let us know. Let me know if there's other topics that you want me to be talking about on this. And thank you for joining. And Mark, thank you. You're wonderful as always.
Well, you are too. Now be nice to your husband. Goodbye.
I'm always nice to him. We had 33 years we're going on. All good.
Wait till it's 41 years. Go on.
Well, soon we'll get there.
There you go.
Thanks.
Take care. Okay. Bye-bye.